Olá, pessoal do IDOMED! Como é que vocês estão? Estamos aqui para um episódio do IDOMED Cast, super legal para vocês, com o Brian Malow. O que a gente quer falar com o Brian Malow aqui no Brasil, pessoal? Brian Malow é um dos maiores comunicadores de ciência que nós temos. É um comediante de ciência, um cara que já entrevistou diversas pessoas laureadas com o Nobel, pessoas importantes para a ciência, e ele está aqui conosco hoje. Por quê? Porque nós estivemos juntos no CIPES, Congresso Internacional de Congresso Internacional de Inovação e Pesquisa em Ensino e Saúde. E como ele estava lá como palestrante, nós o chamamos, nós do IDOMED, que fomos patrocinadores desse evento, o chamamos para estar aqui conosco hoje. Brian, it's a pleasure to meet you here. Pessoal, eu vou falar em inglês com o Brian, a gente vai botar a legenda para vocês, mas aqui com vocês eu vou falar em português, beleza? It's a pleasure to meet you here, Brian, and this episode here is called Science, Communication and Comedy, How It All Comes Together for Brian Malow.
So now I know I'm in the right place because I wasn't sure, and I'm going to choose to speak English because it's the only language I speak. But all I understood was my name, and I heard you say the word English.
That's why he knows. E assim, pessoal, ele sabe que ele tem que falar aqui com a gente, que ele tá aqui com a gente. Vambora, Brian. Então, let's start it, Brian. And it's a comfortable chat with our students, and it's a good place to talk about science communication. So, Brian, can you start by telling us a bit about your background?
Well, one thing that sometimes when people hear that I'm a science comedian, they assume that I'm a scientist, but I'm not. Okay. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. One of my jokes is that I'm not a doctor, but I play one in the broken dreams of my parents. And that's not even a joke because there's a little truth to that because I was pre-med. Okay. And my parents, wished I had become a doctor. The truth, let me go back a little further though. Science was probably my first love, science and music. Love science and music. And I really considered becoming a scientist. But the science I knew the best was probably physics and astronomy. But I like all science. But I read a lot of science fiction when I was young. And a big influence for me, I hope some people have heard of Isaac Asimov.
Okay.
He's best known as a science fiction author.
Yeah.
He died in the 1980s, but he published about 500 books in his lifetime. And he wrote more science fact than science fiction. He's considered one of the grand masters of science fiction, and that's what he's known for. But he was a great science writer. He wrote on every subject. And the reason I like bringing him up is because I think he was the best at taking you to a complex place without losing you. He could explain things so clearly because if you've ever read a popular science book, inevitably there's a part where you're like, I don't understand. Like, you lost me. I don't understand right? He would, when it's a book, there's nobody to ask. Like, I have a question, but there's nobody to ask. With Asimov, that never happens. He knew how to take you to that complex place without losing you. And he wrote with personality and humor even. And so sometimes when I think about my influences and some comedians like George Carlin and Richard Pryor and Steve Martin and the Monty Python and the early Saturday Night Live, all of those were influences. But I think Isaac Asimov was a great influence because I think science fiction is great. It's imaginative and it stimulates your mind and it makes you think about possibilities. And the science fiction I like has real good science in it too, where they care about science accuracy.
Hard science.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, that's what it's called, hard science fiction. Not because it's hard, but they just mean the science is important to the story and science accuracy is important. Sometimes you got to let them get away with faster than light travel, or you might want a time travel story. But we can allow some of that, but you try to keep it. You don't break obvious laws of physics. Like, you remember the old cartoons with the Roadrunner and the coyote and how, they would, go off a cliff and they wouldn't fall for a little while and then they would fall. Like, that kind of, you would never have that in hard science fiction.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like, that would be absurd. So I grew up loving science. And when I went to college, but I also was writing songs with a friend of mine, mostly my words to his music. And then I was pre-med. I got a liberal arts degree at the University of Texas in Austin in the United States. And by the time I finished, good grades. I started to study for the MCAT, which is the test we take to go to medical school. I knew I didn't want to do that. And so I took a year off. You know, our system is different. After high school, you go to university for 4 years typically, and then you would go to medical school.
Yeah.
Or graduate school. I chose to go to graduate school in TV production. I learned video skills. And we didn't used to have high definition cameras in our pockets. So I had to be in a class to get my hands on the nice kind of like the equipment you have here. So I learned video skills. But while I was in that program, I tried stand-up comedy for the first time. In Austin, there was a funniest person in Austin contest, and I had given thought to it, but I was a shy kid. And, you know, this figures into some of my advice, especially about how you will get better as a speaker. The more you do it, the better you'll get. You wouldn't believe, maybe by looking at me now, you wouldn't believe how shy I was as a kid. If I had to speak in front of the class, my voice would shake a little, and I was very nervous. So, but I was falling in love with comedy. I was really inspired by some of those comedians. I had some ideas for some jokes, and so I started doing stand-up comedy. And right from the beginning, it shouldn't really be a surprise. My stand-up comedy was sort of science geeky. It was a little nerdy because I was already a science geek.
Yeah.
So I started doing comedy. I left the video behind. I kind of left science behind, but not really, because I was doing science geeky comedy. And eventually, I don't know, I can't remember, but this phrase science comedian popped into my head. I had already been doing comedy a long time, 10 years maybe. And I thought of the phrase science comedian. I was like, that describes what I do. If I cut some of the other stuff away, science comedian. And I checked, sciencecomedian.com was available.
Okay.
So I thought that's either a really good sign or maybe it's a bad sign. Maybe it's useless real estate. But it was really great because once I had that phrase, stuff sort of crystallized around it. It's like, okay, science comedian. So it sort of focused what my act was if I cut a little bit away. But I have the broadest definition of science comedy. The jokes aren't all educational. The jokes aren't all about science. A joke might be about my girlfriend being short.
Okay.
And then I say that the first time I saw her, I thought she was farther away than she actually was. So it starts off as a joke about my girlfriend, but then it sort of has, it's an optics joke, you could say. Or whenever my father would lose weight, my mother would gain weight.
Okay.
And when my mother lost weight, my father gained weight. It was like the conservation of mass within our family.
Okay.
And I had a theory that you never actually lose weight. You just give it to somebody else. Fat can be neither created nor destroyed. It's one of the basic laws of the universe. So those are just a couple examples of how that's science comedy to me. I'm taking this phrase, this conservation of mass, and I'm sort of abusing it, like using it in a silly way.
Okay, you can get some examples from physics and from biology.
Yeah.
Okay, very
good.
good.
A lot of my references might be physics because that's what I really loved. But not all of them. Like I could also say about my girlfriend, like here's a different joke. The way I come into it is saying I'm talking about getting older. Okay. And I say that we change our behavior as we get older. Like I noticed my ex has started dressing in bright colors.
Okay.
I think to trick predators into thinking she's poisonous. So, and that's silly.
Biology. This is biology.
That's a biology joke. But the thing is, like I said, I'm not introducing the topic isn't biology and predators and whatever, colored, mimicry or something. That's not the topic. The topic is we change our behavior as we get older, and then I use an absurd. But some of my jokes might be about science topics. And that's kind of fun. But what's funny is like when I started using science comedian, which by the way, if you want to find me online, Science Comedian on all your favorite social media channels, Instagram in particular, YouTube, Science Comedian, Twitter or X, if we have to call it that. What was I saying?
But when you talk about science in this kind of humor accent, you need a very specific public. Do you think that it's a problem or it's a condition binded to it?
You know, it's interesting. I have a couple different thoughts on that. One is, let me tell you a little joke that I also use, which is, you're right. I had this very geeky humor. Some jokes are for everyone. Yeah. I used to be an astronomer, but I got stuck on the day shift, which sucks. You know, so that anyone could, the tiny girlfriend looks farther away, anyone would understand that joke.
Yeah.
But I had some jokes that are a little geekier. And I'm working at comedy clubs. People drinking alcohol. They didn't come for science comedy. They just came to a comedy club. So some of my favorite geeky jokes, you just don't do them that often because you want to get laughs, you know, right? You want to get laughs. So, but then if I had enough science people in the audience, if I had a critical mass of science people in the audience, I could pull out the obscure jokes. So, and then I realized it's like, oh, so this is almost what you said. I have to find the complementary audience to my act.
Yeah.
The adenine to my thymine, the guanine to my cytosine, if you will.
So
that's how
again.
I take a topic and just by the absurd use of some science references, but like that's a good one. Complementary. It's kind of a pun. Complementary audience. I don't even, complementary base pairs, you know?
Very good metaphor. And I saw your speak at CPs, and you use metaphors with very facility. It's a superpower, or it's trained.
I don't know if it's a superpower, but you know, it's interesting. Metaphors and analogies. You hear these talked about as communication devices a lot. I give science communication talks to help scientists be better communicators. And I usually call my talk a science comedian's guide to communicating science. And I do draw a lot of lessons from my career in comedy and apply it to stand-up, to science communication. Not exclusively, because also now, I mean, I should say that once I became the science comedian, let me insert this.
Okay.
Because this is the continuation of my path to get us to here, which is once I had that phrase science comedian, that opened the door, that led right into an expectation that I'm going to be educational. Okay. People are like, oh, so I had someone ask me, so you teach kids about science using stand-up comedy? And I was like, no, if you're a geek, I'll make you laugh.
Yeah.
Very different. And I think there's a spectrum between like education and entertainment.
Yeah, perfect.
And I'm an entertainer, or let's say I was an entertainer. But you know what? There is something of the teacher in me. I love to turn people on to books, music, film, authors, interesting science ideas. 3D photography, you know, Queen, whatever it is that I love. I do like sharing. I do like teaching. So I am somewhere on that spectrum. I do like to teach a little.
Okay.
But as a scientist or a researcher, if you're going to have a career in communication, you better be more of a, you know, you better be on that side of the spectrum of actually providing real educational material. And there's no expectation for you to be funny or entertaining, but you certainly better be accurate and everything. There's no for a comedian, you don't have to be accurate. You can say absurd stuff. But I'm somewhere in the middle. I love science, and I love science, so I want the science to be accurate. But I'm also kind of funny, and I like to make things funny. So the thing is, once I was the science comedian, that did lead to science communication stuff. So for years, I made science videos for Time magazine. I don't know how many people here would be familiar with Neil deGrasse Tyson, but in the
Everybody.
okay. Star
yeah.
Talk Radio is his very popular
Yeah,
podcast radio show. And he's an astrophysicist who has really, his career shifted into communication. And he's a great communicator, and he's funny.
Unique.
Unique. Yes. Not a eunuch, but unique. So I did pieces for Neil's show. He randomly emailed me one day. I had an email in my inbox. He had seen me on YouTube, Science Comedian on YouTube, and he wanted to just say, hey, I saw some of your stuff, and it was really funny. And I was, thank you. And then I was making videos for Time magazine, and when I made an astronomy one, I sent it to him.
That's why.
You know, you keep in touch. You know, Neil Tyson emails you, you try to keep in touch with him.
Yeah.
Right? So that led to, I've known him for, I don't know, 12 or 15 years now. And I did pieces for his radio show. And then I started giving science communication talks. And I blogged for Scientific American. So I've done science communication now. You know, my stand-up comedy, I think of it as comedy more than science communication.
Okay.
But there is a lot of science communication in there. But then I've done blogging for Scientific American. I've made science videos for Time. I've done some writing, audio, video, and I have that video background. And so I really now do more science communication stuff. So I'm at that conference.
Yeah.
Not exactly because I'm a comedian, but because I'm a science communicator.
Yeah. Perfect.
They did want something lighthearted, and that's how I ended up there. But yeah. So what was the topic we just broke off from when I said that?
Oh, man.
Let's see if you're less ADHD than me.
Yeah, we're talking about superpower. Or training. If this ability to make analogies and metaphors, if you trained it or no.
Well, that is one of the things. So one time, I've done some work with some great government agencies in the United States, and I've worked with a lot of national labs, like shout out to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, and I've worked with the National Science Foundation, and a man at the National Science Foundation made me give a talk on communicating science with humor. Not just communicating with the public, which I was already talking about, but specifically an entire talk about communicating science with humor. So I had to think more about, what about this whole subject. And I started seeing connections between tools. I realized that some of the tools that are great for stand-up comedy, they're just good communications tools, like analogies.
Yeah.
Analogies are great for humor. Like, it's like, you know, I like using that example that most people have seen at airports. You can't smoke cigarettes anywhere, but they might have one of those special glassed-in rooms, and I think it's like a terrarium in which you can view the smokers in a recreation of their natural habitat. And then, as you know, I extend that analogy. It has many lines after that. But the point is, I think at first I just looked over there and I saw something amused me about the people going into the room and smoking in a glass box. And it didn't crystallize until I had the analogy. And then when you have the analogy, all of a sudden it becomes funny. Like if I just said, hey, look at that room, would you immediately find it funny? No. Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah.
But but that analogy, you go, oh, if you think of it like a terrarium.
Like a zoo.
Suddenly it becomes very funny.
Yeah.
So in that way, the analogy, it's not really simplifying a complex. This is what I think. We always think of analogies as something that it's a way to simplify something that's complex. You don't understand this, so I'm going to compare it to something that you do understand. But that's not exactly what I'm doing. I'm just asking you to look at it a little differently. It's not simplifying it, but it is saying, hey, look at it from this angle, and it's hilarious.
Yeah. It's hilarious.
So my point there is that I realized that some of these tools in stand-up comedy, that's not just a comedic tool, that's a communications tool. And that's why it's similarly useful in science communication. Analogies are useful for clarifying the complex or getting you to see something a little differently. One of the big things I learned was that this is kind of interesting. Like a joke basically has two parts. There's a setup and a punchline.
Yeah.
The setup, the whole point of the setup is to give you every bit of information you need for the punchline to work. And that's going to matter. So here's where it's like relevant to science communication. This depends on your audience.
Okay.
Like if I'm going to tell a joke about a politician, I have to know if you know who the politician is. Can I just say, or Richard Feynman? If I just say Richard Feynman, you might not know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
A room full of physicists will know because he's a late, great American physicist, Nobel Prize winner. So to a room of physicists, I can just say his name. But to a room of people in another country, because he died decades ago, they might not know who he is. So I have to say that he was an American physicist, Nobel Prize winner. So the setup has to contain everything you need, like all the bits that are necessary to understand the joke. But here's a crucial additional point. It can't have anything else. Like adding more to the setup, sometimes we think adding more is better. But that's not how the math works. Yeah. It turns out when you add more, it waters it down. So comedians and scientists have this in common. The comedian thinks, I have more funny ideas to stick in the setup, more funny ideas. But then it's like we get lost and that final punchline doesn't work as well. Scientists, there's so much interesting information and they think everything is interesting.
Yeah.
And it is. I'm not saying it isn't. But now you're giving too much information. And in my talk, I use an example. I did work at a science museum for a few years as well. That's the other part of my story is that I hosted talks for 4 years. I hosted talks by scientists. In 4 years, I probably hosted 1,000 daily talks, short talks, long talks, and science cafes, like on an evening in a bar where it's a more casual vibe. I hosted probably 100 science cafes in those 4 years. And working there, I had a lot of great experiences. Wait, I just lost my thread.
So you trained a lot.
Yes, the setup and the punchline. Oh, yeah. So one of our scientists, sorry about that. See, I did that thing. I got caught up in a digression and I lost the main thread. But the main thread was in my talk the other day. I love this example. One of our scientists was talking about face mites, little microscopic mites that live on faces. There are some on dogs and other animals, but on humans, there seem to be two species.
Okay.
And, you know, her talk is maybe 15 minutes long. And in this part, she shows a slide. And one of the face mites is longer and thinner, and one is shorter and fatter. And that's all she needed you to know. But she would always give the Latin names of the two species.
Okay.
And the audience doesn't want to hear the Latin name. Yeah, their eyes roll back in there. You're going to lose them. And if you ask the scientist, what do you want people to leave here knowing?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want them? Is the take-home message that they know the Latin names of the two species? No. Not even close. So that's an important thing that, by the way, as a speaker or a writer even, you need to know that before you start. What do you want the audience to take away? And it's sort of like the setup and the punchline. What do you want them to get out of this? Is the Latin name necessary in the setup? No, it isn't. Definitely not in that case. And you see that sort of thing all the time. So that's kind of interesting because we just feel like everything's interesting. But you need to know before you start, say, giving a talk.
In which measure?
They're not going to take that much away, you know.
Yeah,
they're only going to retain so much. So you want to really focus your message. And you can stick some things in here and there. But yeah, so so I started seeing all these connections between these tools for humor. That's just communication. I'm trying to get you to laugh. I'm trying to get you to see that terrarium the way I do. It's a communication issue. And scientists have this complex stuff. And you're trying to help someone along, like Isaac Asimov was so good at, about helping them along. You want to teach them something that's a little complex, but you don't want to lose them. There's an analogy or metaphor that I'm working on that I've never really honed in, but it's totally on this topic. It's that it's sort of like giving directions, like road directions to get somewhere. Some people are better at giving directions than others.
A lot.
Sometimes somebody gives you directions and they said something about turn at the red light, and you go, which one?
Which one?
Or at the Starbucks. There's a Starbucks on every corner. It's like this bad directions. Or let's say I refer to, I say then the exit on the loop.
Okay.
Do you know the loop is Highway 610 in Houston? So like that's where you have to know your audience. Do I know what I have to know where you are.
Okay.
If I want to take you to a complex place, I have to know where you're starting.
Yeah.
So this is knowing your audience is a big lesson when you're talking, when you're writing, when you're communicating. And I like saying that it's only communicating if you get your point across. If you don't get across what you really want, you're talking, but you're not really communicating, are you?
Very good.
The analogy is, some people are really good at giving clear directions, and it's like Asimov, carefully taking you from where you are, whatever level of knowledge you're at, to a more complex place. But don't leave out a step, because sometimes you leave out a step, like you lose someone at a red light.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, this was going good, and then it said the fork in the road, and I'm not sure what he was even talking about.
Yeah.
So I like that. And see, like, in trying to make a point, having an analogy or a metaphor like that can be very useful. It makes it more memorable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very good. It's very good to hear your metaphors and analogies. And let's see, Brian, you've performed at a variety of venues, from TEDx Berkeley to the Lindau Nobel Laureate meetings. What is Lindau Nobel Laureate meeting?
Yeah. Lindau.
Okay.
It's like Linda with a U at the end, Lindau. It's a little town in Germany.
Okay.
And in fact, it's an island. It's a little medieval island on Lake Constance. And like when you're on the island, if you look across the lake that way, it's Austria, and if you look over there, it's Switzerland. So it's very southern Germany. And there's this meeting, a science meeting that's been going on for about 72 years.
Very good.
And here's the scale of it now. Every year they bring a bunch of Nobel laureates and a huge group of young scientists from all around the world. So here's the scale of it this year. I'll be going there in a couple weeks. This year, it's a physics meeting. The meetings follow. So the Nobel Prizes, there's a peace prize and an economics prize and a literature prize. This has always been about the science prizes. There are three: physics, chemistry, medicine, physiology. Mm-hmm. Interesting, there's not a biology prize.
Yeah.
There's a medicine physiology prize.
Yeah.
Some overlap there, and there's not a math prize. There are other things like the Turing Award, but it's about these three Nobel Prizes. In recent decades, they added an economics meeting every few years. But annually, this year is a physics meeting, then it'll be a chemistry meeting, then medicine physiology, and it repeats. Every 5 years, they mix it up and have all of them together. The scale is this. This summer, they'll have a few dozen Nobel laureates, mostly physicists, a few dozen Nobel Prize winners, and 600 young scientists from 80 to 100 countries.
Too much knowledge together.
Yeah, and the young scientists go through quite a process. They have to be nominated from a local organization and then submit. And so all the young scientists are extraordinary. And in 2015, about 9 years ago, I was invited to perform at the opening ceremony of a physics meeting. And for fun, I stuck around and I was interviewing some scientists because I love to interview scientists. And somebody noticed. So they hired me to perform at the opening ceremony. Then they saw me interviewing scientists and we had some meetings. And the result was that became my relationship with them. I've been going to this meeting. I've been working with them for 9 years. It's the longest lasting relationship in my life, even longer than my marriage, sadly. Sometimes a joke can be funny and sad. So don't get sad. We'll focus on the positive part of this, the relationship that has lasted 9 years. And what I do is I go to the meeting and I interview scientists for them, for their social media pages.
Okay.
And sidebar, that led to this has had a big influence on my career because I've done that for other clients as well. Hire me to come to your institute or your department, your medical school, your meeting, and let me interview some of your important speakers and through the lens of me. Let me ask the questions. And I'll tell you something. Here's how I take my role as a science communicator. When I'm a comedian, obviously, being funny it's almost really the only rule. Be funny and original.
Okay.
You want to be original and
You're
you want to
very
be
free.
funny, but you have to be funny. You're a comedian. When I'm interviewing someone, I realize that's not my priority. My priority is clarity.
Okay.
I'm interviewing someone, and it might be for a very general audience. I want to make sure everything is understood.
Yeah.
Clarity, number one. Number two, enthusiasm. I have this energy that I bring. So I'm very curious. I'm genuinely curious. I'm enthusiastic. So, like, it's about transmitting, like, the cool factor. Like, isn't this cool? Listen to what he studies. He's a neurologist, you know? And then third, inevitably, hopefully I bring some humor. But it's not, for a good interview, you know, sometimes it doesn't have to be funny if it's just a cool interview.
Yeah, maybe it's a plus.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a plus.
So anyway, Lindau, the Lindau Nobel Laureate meeting, it's been going on like 72 years, and it's all about mentorship. So all these Nobel laureates are there to I'd like to pass the baton to the next generation. They are there to inspire and advise and mentor. The motto of the meeting is educate, inspire, connect. And all that's going on there. You come together and they have this week where they have meals together, they have sessions. Some of the young scientists get to present their research. They get to talk about anything. Like they can ask about work-life balance. It's not just about the science. The laureates are also interested in what the young generation is up to. Like they like hearing about the new science because, you know, they're mostly older and they could be a little out of touch with what's happening in your lab today, you know?
Yeah.
So this has been amazing. For 9 years, I've worked with them, and I've interviewed a lot of young scientists and quite a lot of Nobel laureates.
And with these interviews, what have you learned from these interviews?
Oh, yeah. I think a lot. I've learned a lot of cool science, for one thing.
Yeah.
But I've become a better interviewer. You know, at least one time, you know, they'll set up some interviews in advance. The young scientists, here's how good this has been good for me. They leave me, I'm on my own. Every once in a while, they suggest a young scientist, but the way it works is I just go around and mingle with the young scientists. I sit there at lunch, I talk to them, I meet them in a bar or just between sessions, and I get a feel for whether I think someone might be a good interview.
Okay.
You know, 'cause they're all great scientists, but that doesn't mean they'll all be great on camera.
Yeah, there's something.
Right. So, but a lot of them are amazing. And so very quickly I find, this person would be great for me to talk to on camera. And then I ask them if they will do it. And for some of them, it might be the first time they've really been interviewed on camera because they're young scientists. So, I've gotten really good at that, of being like getting over any nervousness about just doing a spontaneous interview and I've also interviewed some laureates. Those are almost always scheduled because they have to approve that.
Yeah.
And occasionally they'll go, hey, Brian, this laureate just became available. Would you like to interview him right now? They did that to me once. It was a Nobel laureate I've never even heard of. I could barely pronounce his name.
Okay.
I don't know what he does. So that's pretty intimidating, right? It's like I quickly looked up something about what he does. But you know what? Here's how I got over it. And this doesn't bother me at all now because we sit down And the first thing I do is I have them tell me who they are and what prize they won, chemistry in 2012, and what was it for. So they describe briefly their research. And then I just start asking, it's like, I clearly don't understand everything they just said. You know, usually they say this and
It's
I go,
natural.
well, okay, so what? So I just focus on that. They tell me what they do. And then I just ask them what that means. And does it mean this? And could you elaborate on that? And then I have some other questions that I can rely on.
Okay.
I might ask, is there a question you most want the answer to? Great question to ask a scientist. Do you have any other hobbies or, skills or hobbies or interests, anything that you might have considered as a career or just anything else you do? I like that because I also like to humanize the scientist, which sounds like a weird thing to say because scientists are human.
Yeah.
But not everybody knows that. Not everybody knows a scientist.
Yeah. Maybe it's like a kind of species.
Yeah, exactly. And to most people, they don't know what scientists are. So one time I was interviewing this scientist who I thought was very reserved. I go, do you have any other hobbies? And he goes, well, I play saxophone and I play soccer. I don't get to very often anymore. But I was like, I didn't expect those answers. And I used them in my edited interview with him because I thought, oh, how interesting. And people should know this egghead. You think he's some egghead. He plays saxophone. He plays soccer. And he's a
Humanizes.
Nobel Prize winning chemist or physicist. Yeah. So for me, it's been a great growth experience because now I know I have other questions. I love asking, we live in a very politically divisive world, but science often depends on and thrives on good international cooperation, especially giant physics projects like the Large Hadron Collider.
Multi-center.
Yeah. So, so that's a great one. It's like, can you speak to that? I like asking them about their motivation. What gets you up? Because I think the answer is usually yes to this. It's like they are excited to wake up and go do their work. What is it about? Because we should all have that. Whatever you do, what is it that gets you out of bed and anxious to get to the lab and work on what is it you love about science?
It's different to think.
Yeah.
About
Is
it.
there something you wish more people understood about science?
Very good, because it's very different
Yeah.
to us to think of something like this. A scientist going to the lab every day,
Yeah.
and he contains passion. It contains passion.
Yeah.
And they maintain passion. It's something...
I wish I should learn the exact numbers, but people might not know this, but Albert Einstein, when he first published this special theory of relativity, and I think it was 10 or 15 years later that he published his general theory of relativity. And they're two different things, but related. But you got to understand, he was working on that problem for 15 years.
15 years.
Charles Darwin famously didn't publish The Origin of Species for, I think, a couple decades. He started gathering these ideas and having the experience and doing the research when he was quite young, and he didn't publish it till later. It's like some people, yeah, what's behind that? How are you that excited and motivated to work on a problem that you haven't solved in most people give up on a problem if they can't solve it in 15 or minutes or half an hour. These people work on problems for decades. You know what? During the COVID pandemic, something really interesting about scientists, all over the world, scientists that were working on other things stopped working on those things and worked on COVID. I interviewed a scientist who has been working for 40 years on a vaccine for RSV, a different respiratory virus, and they had not had any luck. He had been working on it for 4 decades. That's just interesting point. When COVID hit, his lab worked on a respiratory virus. They stopped working on RSVP and they started studying COVID because they're already doing, respiratory viruses. And it's like, people should know that. It's like, the scientific community was amazed at how much they shared data. They were sequencing genomes all over the world and putting them in public databases. And scientists like, how many other, that's kind of unusual, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
Unique.
yeah. Unique.
For scientists to like, let's put aside our work.
Yeah.
Because the world needs us to work on the COVID problem. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's collaborative. It's beautiful.
So this is science community. This is some of the kind of stuff that don't you wish more people knew this about science and scientists?
Very good. Very good. Brian.
See, you're only going to get a chance to ask like 2 or 3 questions because my answers are long.
No, but it's very good because it's interesting. It's a different kind of occupation or job. We're not used to hear a scientific comedian, people that used to work with it. We are not used to hear about, so it's very good
Thank
to
you.
hear.
And before I don't know if you're about to ask this, but we talked about this before the recording, about how I like even came up with the idea of mixing science and comedy.
Yeah.
But the truth is, it's like I kind of already told you. I didn't decide to be the science comedian. It was a very natural evolution. I loved science first. I started doing comedy. It was geeky. Came up with science comedian, and then it led to science communication stuff. So at each point, if I have something to share about it, it's that I just pursued what seemed most interesting to me. When I went into graduate school for TV production, it seemed interesting. But then I started doing comedy, and I left the video behind. Well, oddly enough, now I make videos quite a bit, and I use all those skills. And that thing that students often ask? Like about algebra. When am I going to need to know this in my life?
In my life, yeah.
Well, I had no idea that I would use my science knowledge as a comedian. That was not predictable.
Yeah.
So you don't know when you're going to need it. But I was into science because I just loved it. And then I was like doing the videos. I was pre-med, but I knew I didn't want to keep pursuing that. I did the video stuff. I did stand-up. At each point, so my career has evolved and changed, and I've stepped outside of my comfort zone sometimes. You know what? I had not done any science. Let me tell you how I started giving science communication talks.
Okay.
Because this is another little lesson, like life advice, or especially for students.
It's special?
Well, at some point, I knew 2 scientists. Here's another piece of advice. A lot of scientists, after they get their PhD, and they work a little bit, they figure out that, research isn't really what I want to do. And they end up becoming science writers or science communicators because they realized that's what I like to do, talk about science.
Yeah.
Lab work, turns out that's not my thing. For some, that's exact. For that guy working 40 years on RSV, he liked lab work, clearly. Okay, so 2 friends of mine that are exactly that, scientists turned communicators. They asked me once, hey, would you like to work with us on doing some science communication training? And I said, sure. And then nothing to really follow up on that. And I got an email from the National Research Council of Canada. And they said, we saw some of your stand-up on YouTube, science comedian on YouTube. And they said they saw some of my stand-up. I'm kidding, but that is the address. But they saw some of my stand-up, and they saw some of the videos I made for Time Magazine, science videos. And they go, by any chance, do you give science communication training? And I said, yes.
Very good.
But I was lying. I had
Out of your comfort zone.
Exactly, outside of my comfort zone. I was ready to. Okay. I had thought about it, and I was ready to do it. So I just said yes, and then I called my friend Kishore, and was like, hey.
How can I do it?
What were you? So did y'all ever do anything, and did you have any? They shared some material with me, and then I created a lot of my own, and I went, and it was very successful, and that was the beginning of that part of my career. So not afraid to step out of my comfort zone, and always pursuing, just realize when we're young, you don't realize you can change your career so much. It doesn't feel that way when you're young, but really you can. And the thing is, if I was pursuing money, I would have gone to medical school.
Yeah.
You know, and I would have, but I threw that aside and was a starving artist for a long time. But I was pursuing what I liked. So that's just useful to know. It's good to know. So at no point, so I just think it's interesting. Becoming the science comedian, that was not a calculated thing. It was, when I came up with the phrase, I told you, it was like, oh, that describes what I'm already doing.
Yeah.
But it did crystallize it and led to all this other stuff. So don't be afraid to pursue what you want if it feels like that's what you really like. And who knows where you are. I mean, this thing I'm doing with the interviews, like, hey, let me come to your meeting and interview people for you through the lens of me. I don't even have a model for that. It's not like, you know, comedians, you've seen comedians, you bought their albums, you listen to them. It's like, I had no model for this. It evolved out of that Lindau experience. And I just kept doing it. And it's like, I really like it. But it's like kind of forging a new path. I don't mean to clap myself on the back too much, but it's a little unique.
But
we're playing with that word. I'm sorry.
But the first step needs courage to
I guess.
to change your.
But hey, I would never have said I was brave. I was shy and nervous, and I get a lot. You know what? Here's another life lesson that has been huge for me, is that I have a million ideas, and I don't pursue them all.
Okay, it's a good.
Very many ideas I don't pursue, and that I should. But you know, there's this quote I've seen it attributed to Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah.
That's become so important to me because there are some instances where I wanted something big that I had to ask someone for. I wanted to propose something, and I was really scared about doing it. But I did it, and it ended up happening. And when it happened, I'm like, oh my God, what if I hadn't asked? What if I had shied away like I do with some of my other ideas? I wouldn't be here right now.
Yeah, inside your comfort zone, but.
Yeah, so don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and go for it. Yeah.
Very good.
We can get back to more communication stuff, or
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Can you tell us about any upcoming projects or collaborations you are excited about?
Yeah, well, now I'm going to produce a podcast for the Lindau Nobel Laureate meetings.
Oh, very good.
And I've never produced a podcast. So, again, I'm going to do something for the first time. But obviously, I've been interviewing their scientists for 9 years. I have a lot of content to draw from. But here's going to be a new project, an audio podcast for the meeting.
Yeah, and it will be a success.
Thank you.
What do you hope your audience takes away from your performance and your talks?
Well, I mean, if I'm performing, I do hope they laugh. And, you know, like I said, I'm not necessarily, all the jokes aren't, you know, rah-rah, I'm teaching you science, telling you about science. But I'd like to think this. If I'm doing a show that's for the public, very often I'm hired by conferences and meetings and stuff like that. But let's say I do an evening of science humor at a comedy club, and it's open to the public. Or I'm just at a comedy club. A lot of people came because, oh, science comedian sounds interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's good.
So they came for the science comedy. But sometimes somebody ends up in the audience and they didn't set out to see science. And maybe they don't maybe they think science is boring or hard.
Yeah.
And, you know, like some of the examples of jokes that I gave you, it's like they're silly and they're not necessarily educational. They're just silly, but they're very science geeky.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that if someone sits through 45 minutes or an hour of me doing that maybe at the end of it, maybe they didn't learn anything, but maybe they're like, hey, that was fun, and it was very science geeky. Maybe science isn't as scary or as hard. Like, hey, like I made the medicine go down, you know? Like that. Like you come out of there going, come on, that was pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe it slightly changes your perspective towards science. So that, and with my talks, you know, I sum up, you know, I can give a talk. That talk you saw was a half hour. but it was condensed from what's usually more like an hour talk. And I have a lot to say, but I try to summarize it in this very basic way. To speakers especially, to scientists, be yourself, be human, and hopefully those aren't mutually exclusive. Be yourself, be human, be passionate, be present, and be prepared.
Okay.
And as I said, the being prepared part is where it starts and makes all the rest possible. If you're prepared, if you know your stuff, it's not memorized. Here, another lesson I learned from comedy. If you're on stage and you're turned inward because you're trying to remember the words to every joke and you're trying to remember the order of the jokes, if you're turned inward like that, you're not out here connecting with the audience.
Yeah.
You have to be present. You have to know the audience.
Yeah.
Know that half of them speak Portuguese and only have a little English. That's good. I don't know what you can do about it, but it's good to know. Know that they're going to be children or adults. Know that they know science or that they love football or something. Know your audience. Know your stuff. Be prepared. You don't want to sound scripted. You know, sometimes when I hosted all those talks at the museum, sometimes a grad student would be given the opportunity to speak on the public stage for the first time. And very often they would start looking up information to memorize and put in their speech.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't understand. The reason you were given this opportunity is because we know you're already ready to do this. You already know. Draw from what you know. Why are you trying to memorize new facts for your talk? Start with what you know. Speak from what you know. And by the way, let me point out, another device for communication, storytelling. Very often when you ask me a question, I answer with a story.
Yeah, it's very
good. Like right there, it's
better.
like I didn't just say some facts. I said grad students do this. I told specific analogies. And I think storytelling is great for memory both ways.
Yeah.
You'll remember it better. But also, about memorizing things, when you have a story, it's an easier way. It organizes the information. So it's easier for me to remember the story and the information I want to share, and hopefully it's more memorable to take away. So if you're prepared, then you can be relaxed on stage and be your best self and be present and reveal a little, be human. Don't be afraid to be, a lot of speakers are so dry and boring, and it's okay to be a little human on stage and have a little passion.
And what about the use of PowerPoint by scientists?
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know if we have time. I could go on. This is a rant. Because PowerPoint, here's something I also say, that everything I say, these are just guidelines. It's not so hard. These aren't rules that you can't break. I like saying everything is a generalization, including that statement. So, generally speaking, though, obviously PowerPoint is useful. I think there's actually empirical evidence that the combination of visual information and the oral is very good and sticky. But often people's slides, they're not very visual. So I like talking about uses and abuses of PowerPoint. And some of the abuses include things like, terrible slides that are very text heavy, right? Just too much text, bad colors, text that's unreadable even. It's too yellow text, not a good idea. But also, here's how problematic text on a slide can be. If it's the same words you're saying, it's redundant.
Yeah.
And if it's different words than what you're saying, and it often is.
Yeah.
I can't absorb either one. You're saying one thing and I'm trying to read that and you're saying something different. So, but again, I'm not saying at no time should you ever have text. If you're an educator, you're giving a lot of information and maybe it's useful to see some stuff on there. Also, if you introduce a new jargon term, often you hear advice, don't use jargon. Well, jargon is useful. Jargon is efficient. You just have to realize when you're using jargon. If you know if you introduce a term and define it, and then you can use it. You know, oh, this is what a apex predator is. And then you can use the term, and you don't have to say every time it's the predator at the top of the food chain. You know what I mean? It's efficient. So the thing is, people use jargon all the time without realizing they're using it. And you know, there's some classic ones they talk about, like, well, the word theory.
Yeah,
a scientific theory, that's jargon.
A lot.
And when you say it, you want to make very clear it's not a hunch.
Okay.
A scientific theory is a high level of established idea. There's a lot of, it's not a hypothesis. It's not a mere hypothesis, and it's certainly not a hunch. When I say I have a theory about why alarm clocks go off every 9 minutes, that's not the same as the theory of gravity or theory of natural selection, evolution by natural selection.
Something like a law.
Yeah. So exactly. It's like a law. But a lot of people that are science deniers will go, well, gravity is only a theory. But theory, okay. And you know what another good one is? Positive and negative results in an experiment. They don't mean positive results aren't good results and negative results aren't bad results. Yeah. But if you're saying something about positive, scientists make that mistake. They use those terms without explaining, oh, we don't mean good and bad. We mean, I can't even define it. But you probably can better.
Yeah.
So anyway, my point is, it's okay to use jargon as long as you know you're using it and you've defined it and you're bringing them with you.
Yeah.
So it's okay to, and if you introduce a new term, maybe that's a good time to put it on the screen, because was that an F or a PH? Like, I don't know what word, like what, I didn't quite even hear the word, but if I could see it. So again, generalizing. Visual slides, though, can be great. Slides should be like special effects in a movie.
Okay.
They should support the story. The problem is, we've all seen movies that they spend $200 million on the special effects, and they spend about $4 on the script.
Yeah.
And it's like bad. It's like, make sure you the story and your presentation is what matters, and that supports you. Here's something else. Again, I'll make this point with an anecdote. I like pointing out when I'm doing that. When I worked at the museum, sometimes a scientist would come in and they would hand me a thumb drive and they go, here's my presentation. It's like, no, you're the presentation. Those are just your slides. And that's what I want you to think about it as. If a presentation is going to go well, it's because humans connect with humans, and you connected well with the audience, and let the slides just support you. And a lot of times people use their slides as a script.
Yeah.
And they turn the back of their head to the audience.
Yeah.
Totally breaking. Humans like eye contact. It's good to look around and make eye contact with different people. And when you turn, why are you reading the slides? They're your slides. You shouldn't have, you prepared them. You shouldn't have to look at them that hard. You should be able to look at them and let them look at the slides. And every time you turn your head and turn the back of your head to the audience, you're breaking engagement. So those are just a couple of the problems. But my big advice on it too is that it sounds hard, but you should be able to give your talk without slides. And that's why, like the talk you saw, I didn't use any slides.
Yeah.
I'll tell these stories. I'll make my points. Now, sometimes I use slides, and yes, the combination can be great. But what I'm saying is, whether you use slides or not, even if you use slides, you need to be able to give your presentation without slides. Let's do this other meta thing too, because I want to say that I'm also, again, an important writing tool that I'm going to do right here is about using concrete examples.
Okay.
Not using concrete examples would be, and this applies to speaking, writing, anything. This is just good writing. If I just say you should be able to give your talk without slides, and then I move on to my next point, you're like, okay, I should be able to give my talk without slides.
Yeah.
But I don't think it hits home. But I'm telling you, one day, if you have a career that you give talks, one day you're going to show up somewhere and they're going to go, the bulb just blew out and we are not going to have a slideshow today. Period. The end. It's not possible. And
you have to talk.
you have to go on without your slides. Now, you would probably be very flustered. But I'm telling you years in advance, that day is coming. So don't be flustered. When that comes, you're going to just go ahead and give your talk without the slides. And here's how, so again, concrete examples. That's a concrete example of why you need to be able to give your talk without slides. But there's more. Let's say you meet someone at a party and they go, what do you do for a living? What are you going to do? Hey, could I take you into the next room? I've set up a projector and I'll tell you about my job. No, you have to just be able to tell them what you do.
Yeah.
And here's how serious I am. Even if you're a nature photographer, you should be able to give your talk without slides. Now, that sounds absurd. You're a nature photographer. Of course you want to show your slides.
Bird 1, bird 2, bird 3.
Exactly. Is that what your talk was going to be? Hey, that's a cool picture I took. Here's another cool picture I took. That's one of my favorite pictures I took. That's a picture. That would be a terrible talk.
Yeah.
It should be more like, this is a picture of me with a blue whale. Let me tell you what that was like. And then you have a story. Well, let's say you are a nature photographer and you have a new book out. Don't you want to go on the radio on a popular science show? You're not going to have slides.
Yeah.
You better have some stories to tell. And so all of these are these are the concrete examples of why you should be able to give your talk without slides. And the point is, the real picture is, maybe that'll never happen. Maybe you're not a nature photographer and maybe the bulb never blows out. But what it'll mean is your talk will be better. Realize that you are the presentation, not the slides. You're the source of everything interesting, and that should just support it. If you have those beautiful photos, definitely show them, right? Not text heavy, but beautiful images, sure. Funny image, you know what? I'm often asked, like, well, what about being funny during a talk? Some easy ways to be funny, because I don't want you to tell jokes. I don't want you to try to be a comedian.
Okay.
But one thing you could do is have a funny slide.
Yeah.
And even if what you're saying isn't funny, I had this talk about helium, how we're running out of helium, and labs will capture and recycle helium. They reuse it. They have hoods and they capture it. And it's inert, so you can just reuse it. And so I was saying these points, not humorous at all. And my ex made me a great slide. And it was like and again, this is audio, and I can tell you this. It was a picture of some trash bins. One said trash, one said recycling, and the third one said helium, and it was floating, and it had like a rope around it to hold it down, and it was floating. And it was like, it's a very cute, funny slide. But what I was saying, there was no humor in my words. The humor was coming from the slide. And maybe you can't make a funny slide. I couldn't, but maybe you have a grad student or a spouse or a friend. Someone can help you. Or, an AI art generator now.
Maybe.
Exactly. So AI was a big topic at the conference. A couple other ways that are easy ways to add humor. A humorous quotation. Yeah. Not off color in any way, but just relevant to your topic. Or a cartoon, like The Far Side or something. Something, again, that's appropriate. So those are ways that you don't have to be a comedian. And the other way that humor, it's my advice about being yourself. If you're prepared and relaxed and your personality can emerge, you'll probably be you'll be a little funny probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. Not everyone is that funny. If you're not, you shouldn't be forcing it anyway. But that's, I think, a great place where a lot of the humor that comes out of my talks, it's not planned in advance. It's that I'm in the moment and I am at my best. Not always, but when I'm at my best, I'm relaxed and funny. And I'm just some little asides. And so that's another place for the humor to come from, where you don't have to be a comedian.
Very good. Brian, we are coming to our final words. So do you have any last...
Are they going to be in Portuguese?
Yeah, maybe. Our last advice is how can our audience find you? In social media, something like this.
Oh, did I neglect to mention that I'm science comedian on every platform? Especially, I'm most active right now on Instagram, and my YouTube channel. There's a lot of content there. You have to dig to find the comedy, but there's a lot of interviews with scientists. And the other thing, and I'm going to use a couple concrete examples to make it clear. My advice to you is, like, if you're going to be a speaker or writer, or
Okay.
anything, any kind of science communicator. I just want you to know that with time, you can get better. I like saying that you shouldn't underestimate the power of time. Concrete examples. You shouldn't underestimate the power of time. With the power of time, a little stream can carve out the Grand Canyon. With the power of time, one unicellular organism can become millions of species. So with the power of time, you can probably become a slightly better speaker.
Yeah.
So, find opportunities to do it.
Okay.
Find places where you can talk about what you do, whether it's bouncing off friends or people you meet or going to speak to a church group or any kind of social group. Look for a museum. Yeah. Look for opportunities to speak and get some practice. And like I said, these things are guidelines and you have to find what works best for you. Like how some comedians stand still and others walk back and forth. Either one of those could work. What's best for you? You're a scientist, experiment.
Yeah.
That's some of my advice.
And where they can find you?
Yes, I did I mention at Science Comedian, wherever books are sold, wherever you are.
Brian, it was a pleasure.
Thank you
to
so
have
much
you here.
for having me. Yeah.
Pessoal, foi sensacional ouvir o Brian falar sobre ciência, comédia, tudo isso que ele disse, muita expertise, gente que fala o que faz e sabe do que está falando. Um grande abraço para vocês, espero que vocês tenham gostado. Brian, takes a bye-bye to the people. E tchau, pessoal, até a próxima. Valeu, tchau, tchau.